Hello, my name is Michele, and you're listening to Profit is a Choice. Joining me on the podcast today is Peter Lang, owner of The Designer CPA. Peter and I both have a heart for supporting this industry with good financial practices and understanding. And today we're going to talk about what we see as kind of the life cycle, if you will, of bookkeeping and bookkeeping needs and the overwhelming hole and desire in the industry to have better bookkeeping practices. So I hope you enjoy the podcast and are able to see where you fit in the bookkeeping trajectory. Every day, empowered entrepreneurs are taking ownership of their company financial health and enjoying the rewards of reduced stress and more creativity. With my background as a financial software developer, owner of multiple businesses in the interior design industry, educator, and speaker, I coach women in the interior design industry to increase their profits, regain ownership of their bottom line, and to have fun again in their business. Welcome to Profit is a Choice. Hey, Pete, welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, Michele, how you doing?
I'm good. I think we got like a really interesting topic to dig into today. We both work in the interior design space and help people with their financials in different ways. And there's like a position between what I do and what you do that is so important. It's called bookkeeping. And we're going to talk about how bookkeeping fits into people's business. I mentioned to you before we started, I wrote it down on my paper. It's really looking at the life cycle of financial management and oversight in your firm. And so I know you and I have joint clients we've shared before, and we work through a lot of things together. And this has come up on my radar as well as on yours. And so when you made a comment in one of our email exchanges, I was like, oh my gosh, we need to get on the podcast and just talk about that. And you're like, yes. And I loved it because you must have wanted to, because you like booked the time immediately.
Yeah. With the industry being the way it is, being so busy this year, that it's a problem that's even come more into light, and for accountants and financial coaches and all sorts of people who are actually paying attention to our clients, we can see it. It's a glaring thing. So understanding and having an understanding of how this process works as your business grows, hopefully by the end of the episode, we'll have everyone feeling a lot better about where they need to be to get their numbers straight.
You make a good point that the busyness of 2020 towards the end of the year and 2021, it put stress on businesses, right? Because we're looking to what I would call grow and scale. And so when all the work comes, whether it's going to be the accounting, the bookkeeping, the financials, you're going to start seeing fracture points in a business when the weight comes in. You're going to see the weak links, right? Just like in a building, if you built up, you would start to see cracks in a foundation if it wasn't set and ready to handle that amount of growth. And that's what I think we're also seeing in some of these businesses, that they're reaching pivot points and decision points with how they're going to handle financial oversight and management in their firm. And maybe they weren't prepared for that and didn't recognize it as such. And then now it just feels like we have these bottlenecks. What I keep hearing is we have bottlenecks everywhere, or things aren't being reconciled and we don't have the numbers. And I don't know not just I don't know my numbers, I can't even get my numbers to look at, right? Let's start, if you don't mind. I'd love for you to start, Pete. And we've done this on other podcasts, but I think it's worthy of repeating. Explain the difference between bookkeeping and what an accountant would do from an accounting standpoint.
Yeah. So a bookkeeper, a traditional bookkeeper will start by maybe just reconciling your, let's say, your bank statements and your credit card statements. So what that might look like is, let's say, for example, you use QuickBooks Online and you've got 2 or 3 different bank accounts, maybe a couple of different credit cards. Your bookkeeper is going to ask you for copies of those statements. And you might wonder, like, what exactly are they doing? Well, in QuickBooks Online, there's a reconciliation function. And all that is them typing in the ending balance and making sure that all of the transactions that are on those statements are in the accounting software you're using, but also just making sure that those are coded in such a way that they're in the right place as far as, is this an expense? Is this a capitalized improvement? Was this a transfer from a personal account? That kind of thing. And so that's the simplicity of how to start looking at what a bookkeeper does.
Exactly. I think if we think about it, well, for those of us my age, I guess, maybe a few years younger than me might remember it, but we used to have like the checkbook register for our own personal home. And we would write down the checks, and then we would get a bank statement, and we would sit down and we would reconcile to make sure that our checkbook with our carbon copies, or however we kept up with the little register that went with it, we would make sure that the bank says what's in the bank is the same amount that we believe is in the bank. So on a personal side, that was, if you will, we were keeping our books up to be in alignment with what the bank said we had. And that is, in a very, very tiny way, is what is also happening here, but in a much larger way. I remember this. So when I was a senior in high school, I'd put all my money in the bank. I'd opened a bank account. I had been working and waitressing and putting money in because we were going to the beach for high school graduation. And the day before graduation, I go to the bank to pull out my money, and they tell me there's no money in my account. Okay, well, if anybody knows me, I'm like a math crazy person. So I can promise you I did not overdraw my account. And I'm standing in the bank saying to them, I did not spend that money. And they're like, yes, you did. Maybe you don't know how to do the math. And I'm like, you are talking to the wrong chick. Like, that's not me. Thankfully, my now husband's mother worked at the bank, and I went and sat in her office, tears pouring down my face. All my hard-earned money, we're probably talking $500. All my hard-earned money is gone. I'm supposed to be going to the beach for graduation tomorrow. I have no cash. Long story short, the bank, remember when they give you those starter checks?
Oh, yeah.
The bank had given me a set of starter checks. Well, some other guy had opened a bank account, and they accidentally had a duplicate set of starter checks with the exact same bank number on it. So all of my checks were coming out of the account, and all of his checks were coming out of my account.
Oh my gosh.
Thankfully, they were able to go back and to catch it. They put a hold and they put the money back. But my point in that is, even with my own personal $500, if I had not been reconciling and watching and keeping up with it, it's easy for a mistake to come in, whether it's an overcharge on a credit card, missing something. You and I both have worked with clients where something wasn't accounted for and they're overdraft, or, didn't have the money to pay for something because they forgot that they were supposed to, a PO wasn't entered. And so they spent that money on something else. I mean, we've seen it over the years. It's just that same thought process of, if we're spending it and the money's going in and out, account for it by keeping the books, if we can think about it that way. And then to your point, the bookkeeper goes in and does reconciliations. And reconciliations are on not just the bank accounts, but on credit cards. Like, don't miss the credit card reconciliation, right? That's really just a small bank account that we're managing.
Yep, exactly. And we can kind of tell when we look at, the financials pretty quickly if all of the credit card transactions have been put into the system based on, the number that we can see. So everything, because you don't want to just, you want to make sure, what I'm trying to say is, you want to make sure you're recording those credit card transactions on the day that you actually get the charge, not the following month afterwards. It needs to be based on that.
So then all right. So we know what a bookkeeper does. They're doing that level of work. Now, before we move on to accountant, I want to take one step back, because you mentioned that as traditional bookkeeping, but I would go as far as saying it could go all the way back to putting in the invoices, creating the POs, anything, if you're talking really deep internal, keeping up with everything, right?
Oh, yeah. I'm just talking about...
right, outsourcing potentially to a bookkeeper.
Yeah.
Right, but I want us to understand that the full life cycle, if you will, of bookkeeping starts with entering the invoices, to your point, entering those credit card transactions, linking up the bank, entering the purchase orders, keeping your QuickBooks, your studio, whatever it is you're using to keep up with it. It is all the way back to there, right? It is every time we are entering something into that financial software.
Exactly. And so whether it's you as the business owner or a bookkeeper, that is, from the start, that it's so important to do. And also, unfortunately, based on what software that you use, the time commitment to put all that information in could drastically be different as well. So if you use an accounting software where you're connecting the accounts and you kind of have a head start where it's all in a dashboard and you just need to make sure that you're categorizing them all and making sure they're all going into the register, versus maybe using another one where it's more of a manual process, that time commitment can vary, based on which software you find is best for your business too.
Right. So bookkeeping, just a quick recap, starts from the moment that we enter any transaction into our financial software all the way through reconciliation. And I would go as far as saying that there could be some tax reporting for like sales tax or preparing the financials for a tax overview or a tax analysis for the CPA, right?
Sure.
So then share where a CPA or an accountant would pick up from where the bookkeeper kind of leaves off.
Yeah. So based on, when I think of an accountant or a CPA, someone who maybe, let's just say an accountant, because there are some bookkeepers who I would call a bookkeeper. And then there's some, I shouldn't say bookkeepers or bookkeepers, but
it gets muddy in there.
It does get muddy. So now let's talk about someone I would call an accountant. That's someone who is paying attention to your accounts receivable and your accounts payable. So what do I mean by that? I mean, like, are the invoices getting to your customers? Are they getting done? And is someone paying attention to how long it's been before your customers are paying those outstanding invoices? Do you have someone putting in your bills as you come in and putting the details of your vendor bills in there? For example, a FedEx bill comes in that's due in 30 days. Is that information getting put into your accounting system, let's say within a day or two of receiving the bill, and the due date is there so that the accountant is looking at that report and making sure that the bills get paid for you? And then, the next step would be, how much is that accountant looking at the overall financial statements for you and just making sure that the numbers, based on the detailed work that they're doing, does all of that information on those financial statements look appropriate based on where you're at in your business as well? And
then what about the CPA tax portion, the next step from that?
Well, so there's different CPAs, right? The tax portion. So I know some CPAs that will just kind of ask for the financial statements at the end of the year and then just do a tax return based on that, whether it's on the accrual basis or the cash basis. But then there's other CPAs who you might have a relationship with that actually are looking at your financial statements throughout the year, whether that's quarterly, monthly, maybe a couple of times a year to do like a fall projection. They're asking, ideally a good CPA is asking the right questions, maybe even having a dialogue with the accountant or bookkeeper and you as a business owner to just make sure that they understand, what the financials are saying at any given time, but also like where the projects are heading, let's say by a given time. So we're recording this at the end of September and it's fall. And so just kind of getting a good CPA is getting an idea of where the chips are going to fall, I say, by the end of the year, meaning, what kind of, if you're working on 6 different projects, which ones are going to, not finish until next year, which ones are going to get done, and what you see coming in, money out for the next 3 months, so that they can give you a good idea of, where your salary is, if that needs to be adjusted, how you've done with paying taxes so far throughout the year, and how much, if it's possible, coming up with different tax deductions so that you are minimizing your taxes legally and in a way that's most beneficial for you.
Okay, so we've got bookkeeping that we would say, and of course, we're looking at all of these in very detailed ways, but there is a lot of murky muddiness, meaning there are positions and companies that do bookkeeping with light tax accounting. There are some that don't do projections. All they do is take what you have, look at it, put it on the forms and send it in. There's some that CPAs and bookkeepers that are more consultative in nature. So it all shifts and changes. And that's why we have to really know what we need and when we need it. And those needs change. And so we wanted to start with just kind of this overarching, what does it look like, life cycle of getting the numbers in and putting them in the right places, reconciling that they're in the right places, and then making sure that we account for them properly internally and to the government through taxation and whatever that tax strategy looks like, and then checking salaries and all that. So really just watching the overall financial health of the firm. Where we want to dig in deeper today is, here's what I'm seeing, and here's what, Pete, I know that you said you're seeing as well. We're seeing people that are starting off. If we were to just high level it, and then let's bullet point and detail through it. High level, most people start off either with a very small version of, let's say, an accounting software, a small QuickBooks, or they start off managing through spreadsheets, Google spreadsheets, Excel spreadsheets, something where they're just writing it down and keeping up with it. We used to laughingly call it the shoebox method, right? Everything's thrown in a shoebox, you bring it to the accountant. But these days, we're a little bit more savvy. And so most people are starting with something like that. They're usually, if they're a smaller firm, starting as a solo, they're keeping up with everything on their own, and they're turning over their spreadsheets to their accountant. They don't even have a bookkeeper. They are keeping their books. They turn it over to the accountant, usually at the end of the year, and figure out what needs to happen. The next stage is they are growing enough that they recognize that more transactions are coming in. They can't keep up with all of them. So maybe they hire a bookkeeper or they bring somebody in, but mostly they outsource bookkeeping because they realize there's a bottleneck. Internally, they're usually still entering the POs and entering the invoices and, perhaps paying the checks or doing some of the money internal management. And they are letting the bookkeeper categorize, reconcile, and perhaps do sales tax. Right?
Yep.
Then the next phase is, oh my gosh, so much is coming in that this is where I start to see them jam up, and they start asking the bookkeeper, perhaps an outsourced bookkeeper, can you do invoices? Can you do PO management? Can you do some of that level of bookkeeping that we are having to do internally because the transactions are so heavy? Can you help us do billing, time billing, product billing? Can you help with that? And then what we see is the business grows so much that what the needs that they have from an outsourced bookkeeper becomes so expensive because there's so much that they need to really be able to, like you said, to have the answers within a day, within 3 days, within a week, to be able to stay on top of it. It's almost like they need a full-time person in-house to do a large portion of it, where they can get the answers by turning to the left and asking the designer sitting over there instead of waiting for an email chain back and forth, right? And then perhaps having an external bookkeeper who truly reconciles, double checks, and just make sure everything's in the right place. And so that's kind of that life cycle of bookkeeping that I've seen and that you've seen. And the muddy area is kind of right there in the middle between that 2 and 3, where the external bookkeeper is so overwhelmed because the business has grown so quickly. But let's go all the way back to starting on their own and with a spreadsheet, because there are some there. What would you say to them is the pivot point when they know that it's time to take that next step and get an external bookkeeper, or even if they hired an internal person, but they are handing off that particular work as the owner, they're no longer going to do all of that. Where is it that it should be like, ding, 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 this is your sign, it's time to move on and hand this off?
I would say, I don't want to say right away before it even starts, because that's not that's not fair.
That's ideal, but it's not always feasible,
it's not
right?
always feasible, right? I get worried that one little thing that you'd miss in a spreadsheet could, ruin the whole thing. But I would say if you are finding yourself either getting up earlier or working late into the night to make sure that the spreadsheet is up to date while you do the things that you do as a designer, as a business owner during the day to help your clients, or if you're like in the back of your mind knowing, oh, I haven't updated that Excel spreadsheet in over a week or 2 weeks at the most, it's definitely time to find at least someone who can help put transactions in and reconcile your statements, because you're going to burn out, or, you're just going to get even busier. And, I've said this many times before, but you also didn't start your business to do accounting. So investing and putting that work into with someone who actually is someone who likes to do that kind of stuff and can help you is the way to go.
I kind of think that honestly needs to be one of the first hires, whether it's internal or external, part-time. I think the first hire is to get the financials in alignment. And this is just me, get the financials handed off to somebody who loves to do that, like you said. Because otherwise, how do you ever really know if you can afford to do the next things that you want to do? And that's when people always call me. They're like, I've got all the numbers, but I don't know if I can afford to ABC or XYZ. And it's because the numbers aren't accounted for, or they're just in a spreadsheet, but do you really know what they mean if they're not interpreted into an income statement or a balance sheet? They're just numbers in Excel.
Yeah. And you can budget that out when if you haven't even started your business yet and you're coming up with startup expenses, you want to maybe call a couple of bookkeepers and just get an idea of what they think. Are they going to charge, the same amount on a monthly? Do they have an hourly rate? And therefore you want to know approximately how many hours it takes a month for them that they think that they're going to do that. Because the other thing is that if you say to yourself, well, I'm just starting out and I'll work at night, I'll bust my butt to do it, and I can't afford that right now. A lot of times what ends up happening is I've seen it where business starts out, we're going to do it on our own. We're going to hire, a lawyer to set everything up. We think we only have one project, but before you know it, in 3 or 4 months, now we're on 4 projects. We don't have time for this. We hired a CPA. We need to pay taxes. But I've had people where I'm like, okay, but until your numbers and your information is in some sort of accounting software and done, and then it's like, okay, I did that. No, you didn't, because it doesn't agree to the statements I'm seeing, that kind of thing. It costs more money to eventually find that person that knows what they're doing and go back 3, 6, 9, 12, sometimes 18 months.
Forensic accounting. And it's just like anything, right, Pete? Anything we have to go back and redo is more costly than if we've done it right the first time.
Yes.
And here's the challenge with this I want to throw in there. It's not just that it's more costly, it's that it takes an exorbitant amount of time and you are in financial limbo to some regard until that back historical financial data gets settled and accounted for. You're in limbo right now because it's all moving forward with you. So it's a terrible place to be.
Yeah, and you also need, this is why we were kind of talking about the differences between the 3 people. You also need to have an idea of who does what, right? So you could have a CPA that you know of or you hired that's going to help with your projections and your tax returns. And I've had where it's like, can you just, can you fix everything so that we can get that? Well, if it takes three months to fix everything, well, we've already lost 3 more months. So we use those 3 months to catch up. Now we're behind the 3 months it took us to do that. And it's just this reoccurring thing where we're always kind of behind. And CPAs and accountants in our industry, we're just as busy as other industries where it's like, we're not bored just sitting around and everything's going to get caught up in a week, right? So the longer you wait to start, the longer it's going to take to fix. And then it's just like a snowball that you don't want to get there. So starting off on the right foot and making sure that you find the right person and asking them what exactly. And if you're thinking about it and you're doing it on your own right now and you're like, I don't even know where to start, asking if you find a good bookkeeper that you think could work, going through this and being like, would you be willing, or do you have the time capacity to also enter invoices and bills and that, or do you just reconcile accounts and that's it? That way you have an idea.
Well, and so there's an educational component too, though, because there are some that will say, let me teach you the process to do this piece so that it shows up correctly when I get it. So, you could always do that. I would also say a couple of things to add to that. Find out if those bookkeepers are willing to start with you at a smaller investment, like perhaps only doing reconciliations and sales tax. And then as your business grows, do they have the capacity to grow with you to kind of move into this stage 2 that we're talking about? And the other thing I want to say is don't forget that you all can charge admin fees. And so if you increase your rates to include some administrative costs or to really have a true understanding of what it takes to run your business, you can build into your fees, you should build in to be able to have the support for somebody to do the billing and the reconciliation and all of that. So just make sure you're not undercharging in a way that doesn't even allow you to have support to run the business.
Agreed.
Okay, so now they move into the second. They've hired a bookkeeper. They're no longer on their own spreadsheets. And this is where we're seeing the biggest kind of smackdown, if you will, is they have a bookkeeper. Let's say the bookkeeper primarily did reconciliations. Here's what I see a lot from my clients. They'll get from their bookkeeper monthly a reconciliation report. They'll get an income statement or P&L, a copy of the balance sheet at the time of reconciliation. They might get an AR, accounts receivable report, an accounts payable report. And then sometimes we might, perhaps based on the business, get an inventory report, or we might get a report of prepays, how much money is sitting in prepay accounts, or, that we're going to be using just so that we can balance. That's an area that gets unbalanced a lot. And so, kind of here's what's happening. That real quick snapshot, 5-6 reports, that's what they get. But when it gets so busy, this is where we're seeing them go, I can't even get all of these products. Like they've got entire houses that they're trying to order and procure. That's invoice, purchase order, payment. What account does it need to go in? Because are we going to save it in a COGS account? Are we moving it over here? And when do we claim the revenue on that? It gets squirrely and messy, and there's so much work. The backlog is overwhelming. Is that? And I know that's what you've seen as well.
Wait, I'll just do a quick story because this happened just a couple of weeks ago, because September 15th is a time when people do estimated tax payments, and I'm asking for the reports, and the bookkeeper, because it's just a bookkeeper in this situation, sent the reports to the client and then just kind of said, well, you're in a loss, so I don't know why he even cares. But she had about $190,000 in proposals that the project was done. It's just that the bookkeeper only reconciles and does sales tax. They don't know how your projects are going. They haven't gotten to that level, and it's not their fault. There's no communication. That's not what they do. But they're just like, hey, I know what a balance sheet is, and I know what a P&L is, and I'm looking, and you're at a loss. But they're ignoring the $190,000 in profit that needs to move over. They just didn't know to invoice it. Well, now all of a sudden we went from a loss to a very big gain, and so that stuff matters. And I think so that's a good way to kind of explain it, that whether it's a bookkeeper or an accountant at a certain level, I find that with a lot of projects in the design industry and where they're at, and also a supply chain delay and where everything is in the project, they don't have that information, most of them, to be able to say, oh, wait, you know what? Like if I'm looking at the details of the client deposits that have come in proposals, I should have, we should have invoiced that, or someone should have invoiced it. But that person who's going to do it maybe doesn't know that they need to do it, or you haven't found that right person yet who can help you do that.
Right. Or it could be a person that's not as aware of the tax implications, and they're thinking, I'll move it over at the end of the month and not paying attention, right, to the dates, because to them, they don't know, or it's not their area. And all right, so when do we think that interior designers, Pete, that are the first thing, let me back up. The first thing I see them do from my experience is usually if they have a really good bookkeeper, right, that they really like, that they can talk to, and we'll talk in a minute about, again, making sure that you have the right fits. But if they've got a really great bookkeeper, there's a lot of trust there. They feel like they're keeping up with it. Usually the next conversation before they hire internally is they say, is there anything else, any other service that you can do to take some of this off of our plate? Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. But I want to be really clear here, because I've heard a lot of chit chat all over the place. It's a lot of work. And when you are paying outsourced dollars, you're paying more for something than if you were paying, quite often, an employee that came in to do that same work. Right. Correct. It's just the matter of the way that it works.
And also, if it's a bookkeeper or an accountant who maybe, has a few interior design clients, or maybe even a lot or none, whatever, and they're trying to help you in every sort of way, and so they're agreeing to it, they might not realize, well, a lot of times they don't realize the amount of time that it's going to take. And so one of two things happens. Either they're billing by the hour, they're working like crazy, and then all of a sudden your bill shoots up. Or if they've agreed to a fixed monthly, rate, then they're like, hey, this isn't going to work out because I'm doing all this extra work. I can only do this. And so to your point about like when that kind of happens, I see it happening a lot based on the size of projects. But if you're starting to juggle maybe 3-4 projects at a time, now all of a sudden, there's no way that one person can handle all of that, plus their other external, clients that they have. And so they don't understand how much time it's going to take. And it just kind of snowballs. The same thing where it's like things start to back up, and then all of a sudden, you're not getting as accurate of reports as possible because they're so overwhelmed with the amount of work that they have to do.
It is a very, very detailed part of our business. I don't think anybody would argue that. And with the level of detail and, dare I say, perfection that needs to kind of go into it so that things do balance out, it takes a lot of time and effort and energy and oversight. And I think that's when it should start getting your attention, is when if you have outsourced these things to an external bookkeeper, when the price every month keeps going up, and I'm not beating up on the bookkeepers, because it is no different than a designer not really understanding the scope or wanting to help, and then realizing, oh, snap, and they send this large bill to their client who has a coronary, or they offer a flat rate and then they're kicking themselves. And now they hate that job and hate that work when it really was an underestimate of the time, right? Or of the investment. We all can do this no matter where we are. But when we start seeing thousands and thousands and thousands go out to bookkeeping because what we're asking them to do, and I would almost hesitate to say 3 or 4 projects, because 3 projects at $10,000 each is very different than 3 projects at $250,000. But I think when you get 3 or 4 large projects that are multi-rooms, full homes that are heavily transactional, that's when you're going to see this backup. Because what you're really seeing is you need somebody half time, 3/4 time. And it is going to be very hard to get that level of resources from an external source without paying a lot more money for it.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So when all of this happens, I really like to see, unless it is somebody who, well, let me do it this way. How about there's an interim step? I think there's an interim step. Pete, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this. When I am bringing somebody in, because some of my clients were doing this, we're now bringing in if you will, a live person to work in the business, even if it's still remote, but that is more of employee based. Let me come in and help in that area between procurement and bookkeeping, because that's the muddiness internally of all the transactions. That's where it's so transaction heavy. When they do that, we still sometimes keep a bookkeeper as an overseer that does the reconciliation, so that we make sure that we have somebody else double checking that we're putting things in the right place, doing them in the right timing. And we allow them to be now more like the financial oversight of that, with the high level checkoff, instead of putting every single thing on that one new person who we've just brought on. So, and then over time, sometimes that person might stay in that role. Sometimes we might bring it in-house. But kind of that interim step is to go back to what we started with, but hire somebody internally to do the transaction management.
Right. Absolutely. Because it also, I'm just thinking it's also a second set of eyes external to the statements. If they're still doing the reconciliation, they can still look at the statements and kind of ask questions, and hopefully build a relationship with that internal person who has a pulse on how the project's going, and where where things need to be as far as where the project is going. I like the idea of hopefully having someone who, on a weekly basis is meeting with that internal person and just making sure that when they're looking at when the external person is looking at those financials, they have an idea and a comfort too of, these numbers make sense from a money and how the project's going. Does this need to be invoiced? How is this project? Oh, it makes sense to have a higher number here because we're waiting on some things, that kind of stuff. So if everyone is still communicating on the team and there's that level of communication, then, I think that's the best, most beneficial thing.
I also would suggest, as you're looking for resources to help you, whether it's a bookkeeper or an accountant or coach or whatever, you want somebody that has an avenue for allowing you to ask some questions to get them answered. Whether it's you are paying your accountant for what I would almost call a little bit more CFO services, right? So that it's more than just the transaction of doing the taxes, but it's more of looking at the business as a whole and really being consultative in nature. In the bookkeeping, is there a way? And they may give it to you like within a package or within a limit or whatever. But I think that anytime we get to a point that we don't think we can ask questions, we're putting our business in danger. And I'm not talking about over asking, not doing our own education and due diligence, but the whole reason that we hire experts in our business, whether it's an attorney, an accountant, a bookkeeper, a coach, it doesn't really matter who it is so that they know more than we know, and they can take us where we can't go ourselves. They can do what we can't do so that we can go focus on what we do. But we have to be able to ask the questions if we have them, because a lot of times that's going to clear the path. So I say that because I've worked with clients where they pretty much weren't allowed to reach out to their accountant or to their bookkeeper until it was time for a report. And it wasn't can we get together and talk? A lot of the really great bookkeepers that I've been running into lately, they have a financial meeting with the client after the reconciliation to say, here's what happened. Here's what I see. Here's what this means. Do you have any questions? Or here's what I see coming, or this was different. Like they point things out, right? When you start looking at accountants that are more CFO or more future focused in nature, not transactional, they're the ones like you, Pete, that say, let's meet once a quarter or let's meet 2 or 3 times a year and make sure that we have your salary and your distributions in alignment. Let's make sure that we're covering with taxes, or, what are the changes that you're looking to make? What's the best way to do that? And so really building that team where you feel like they're on your side, is super, super important.
Yeah. I'm a CPA who focuses, I'm a tax guy. I always said versus auditing and that kind of stuff. But I also, now I kind of pride myself on just being that overhead person, that 10,000 feet up looking down, and I can kind of ask questions. And for the most part, the clients that I have, I can, send them an email or forward it to the accountant or bookkeeper and get an answer, or even kind of say, hey, I think it should look like this based on what I heard from my client. But it's the situation, whoever that is on your team, you want to make sure you have someone on your team who is doing that. And usually what happens is if I ask those questions to a client, or they say they're not allowed to ask the bookkeeper, then I'm like, okay, it's
a red flag.
Exactly. Yeah. It's either the bookkeeper is overwhelmed and won't know the answer and is offended, like, why are you asking me that? Or, or other reasons, right? So if I've asked questions, or if I've pointed something out, and the person, because I'm not trying to tell people like what to do, or I'm smarter than you or anything like that. But if I get like a snotty answer or no response, or figure it out yourself, or that kind of stuff, that's definitely a red flag where I'm like, as hard as it is to find a bookkeeper, you can do better. And you don't, you don't want to deal with that.
You don't have to stay in that. Mm-mm.
No. Yeah.
No. The whole thing here is for us to all be collaborative and work together. We're trying to work towards the same end, if we're really in it together. Let's talk for a minute, Pete. What I want to do is I'm going to jump in and give you a 2-second on how I fit into the picture, because people are probably going, well, what do you do in all this? And then what I'd love to do is talk about how to find that bookkeeper, even how to find an internal person to do bookkeeping, right? Because that's really what we're here saying today is there are many of you that are listening that your businesses are bursting at the seams, and perhaps you're with a bookkeeping firm that you are asking so much of, and it doesn't fit within their business structure to be able to support you at that level. I think that's fair. Some of you may work with a bookkeeping firm that has the ability to bring on additional resources to help with that. And that's awesome. If you have that, and you can work like that, and you're still getting your reports on time, and things are still saying updated and it's correct, keep doing it. Like, nobody's telling you not to do that. But Pete and I definitely have seen the cracks and the fissures, if you will, in the bookkeeping space for interior designers, that were growing and couldn't keep up with all that work. So before we jump in to tell you how to find a bookkeeper like that, the way that I look at my role in working with clients is they're coming to me to help build strategic plans, to look at the business in a holistic way, not just the financials, right? I'm looking at your marketing. I'm looking at your client experience. I'm looking at how you hire, how you fire, how you do what you do so that you can be a better business manager, business owner, CEO, integrator, whatever piece of that you need and want to be. But there is a financial component. And so because I'm nerdy and I love all the financials, and that's the piece that I see as a great place to start to see what's important and to see choices that have been made. I look at the P&L and the balance sheet, and when I look at them, I can understand the cumulative effect of every choice that has been made in that firm, because it shows up there and on your calendar. That's the two places that our time shows up on our calendar, how we spend it and how we spend our money, and the choices we make shows up. And so when we look at that, and I usually ask the questions, are you where you want to be, or where else do you want to go? We can look at how you're making financial decisions, because that affects like the hiring. I'm going to see that in salaries. Marketing, is it working? Is it not working? I'm going to see that in a marketing budget or on a marketing strategy call, in your calendar. We can take any part of your business and tie it to that P&L and see if it's supportive of what you're doing and where you want to go. That's where I come in, is digging and pulling those pieces apart to then give you information to go back and ask your bookkeeper. Here's information to go back and ask your accountant. Here's information that we need to talk to your financial, planning or wealth management advisor, and pull in your accountant and pull in your bookkeeper so that we can all support you. Here's what you need to go talk to your attorney about. Like, I see myself as, like Pete would say, 10,000 level, looking at financials and an overall view of the business as well. I'm maybe moving up to a 50,000, but then dropping all the way back down to a 2,000, or in the weeds and going up and down and across. And so it's just another view. Let me explain it this way. This is the way we talk about it in my coaching Imagine that we're at a football stadium, or you could be at a concert, right? There's something happening on the field. Pete's not sitting in my chair and I'm not sitting in his. So the way Pete sees the action on the field is one slice, one view of the action. Where I sit, I have a different view. Where the bookkeeper sits, she or he may have a different view. We all have a different view. Where, let's say, our client, the designer, is on the field with their team and with their clients, we're all in different places in the stadium. So we all are watching the same thing happen, but we're looking at it through a different lens or from a different seat. And so it gives us information to share with each other to help our clients play their game better, right? That's really what we're talking about here. And I think it helps when you think about it that way. So they're all important views. They're just different. So Pete, anything you want to say on that? And then we'll jump in and talk about how to find a bookkeeper.
No, I was just going to say, and that's why there's times where I contact you based on what you're helping clients with, and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. Is this kind of what you would be thinking too? And there's times where you do that to me, and there's, we have a working relationship like that where you could have a different CPA who's like, who are you and why are you asking me those questions? And then
we've had some of those.
Yeah. And so that's a bummer too.
That's a hard one. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
and that's what I say, because what is our goal ultimately? I mean, I am a support person. You're a support person. Bookkeepers are support people. So to me, our job and our role is to support what is best for that client, to give them information, to help them understand so that our clients can make the best decision for where they want to go in their business and what they want to do. So why would we not work together for the betterment of that client, right?
Right. Theoretically. Exactly.
Right. And it's nice because we certainly have clients that are not in common. And I do work with other bookkeepers and other accountants and other people. And I'll say probably 7 out of 10 are fine to work with. But there are those 3 to 4 that get their hackles raised and get angered if you come in and ask them anything because they think you're questioning their authority and their ability, when many times you're just trying to understand. And so I'm going to say, if that is the relationship that you have with the people that are helping manage your financials, you need to find new people.
Yeah.
I just think you do. I wouldn't live my life somebody that was helping manage my business that wouldn't talk to me.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. So how do we find these bookkeepers, people? Because we got a little hole in the marketplace right here. So how do we help our people find these bookkeepers? Because I know, like you, I've reached out to some and they're like, we're 3 months out, we're 6 months out, we're a year out, we're on waiting list.
I wish I had a better answer, but I will say that the best thing to do is to kind of think about what you need completely, meaning task-wise. And just as you're getting to know a potential new bookkeeper, just asking them, hey, would you have capacity to do this, that, and figure out, okay, this person, it sounds like this person could help me with all of these things, or maybe some of these things, half these things. And if they say no, on some of the stuff, then it's just a matter of finding someone else to do it. I always say the person doesn't necessarily have to just work with designers, but it would be helpful for them to have at least a basic understanding of the details of the industry and what it's like to deal with the life of an entire project from beginning to end.
I have found success working with bookkeepers who understand the construction industry and like landscape architects, because they're doing the same kinds of things that we're doing, like landscape designers and landscape architects. They've got a beginning to an end with plants, and they're building hardscapes. So I have seen huge success working with them because they understand, to your point, a project. They understand cost of goods along with service hours and design hours. They understand job costing, if that were to be necessary, or project costing. And so those would be 2 other industries that, if they understand and have a good, they're able to wrap their arms around kind of the pass through and the process of those 2, construction and landscape architect or landscape design. I just think those would be others to consider. Are there any other industries like that you have seen that have like a parallel with how we do things?
No, I think those two are the one. If there is something, it would just be like some sort of job costing, but construction and landscape architecture seems to be the most the closest one. So yeah. So how else do you find a bookkeeper? I don't give up. I really think there's just so much frustration out there of there is nobody who can help me. I mean, you also, based on the softwares you use, there are options where you can kind of look on their website and they have partnership program. And I know that some of the software programs are trying hard to find new partners as well, because just because a lot of the partners that they've had are at capacity. And now if you're going to also use that, if you can talk to someone from the company, just kind of see what their vetting process is on how you become a partner. Is it just like, hey, I'm going to pay this much money and now I'm a partner of yours and you're going to put me on my website? Or for example, I know there's years ago, I said I wanted to be a partner. It made sense to be a partner for a software. And I had to take a very quick test. It was very easy, but it's just, I was impressed by
it. It was more than strike a check.
Yeah, I was impressed by that it was like, okay, it just wasn't like, hey, pay this amount and we'll put a badge or an icon, next to your name and you can use it on your website type of thing.
Well, and to that point, I'm Profit First certified, and it's an investment of money, but it's an investment of time with an entire certification process that's months in the making. It's just not a quick, here's some money and here's a badge. I think it's also important to ask if you are looking for a bookkeeping firm, and let's say you find one on one of these sites based on the project software you use, I think it's worth asking them what their educational background is and how they bring on other bookkeepers, and are they QuickBooks certified? Like, what is it that they have? Because I've seen quite a few bookkeeping firms where they're hiring people and not educating them properly. And then the books are a hot mess and our clients are paying for it. So I know you have seen that as well, but
yeah. And not to put more stress on the business owner, but just because you have a great situation today doesn't mean it's going to be a great situation in 3 months from now or next year. So it's just something that you want to make sure that you are staying on top of and still paying attention and having those conversations and figuring out what those questions are. If you are meeting with someone or if you're getting a package, being able to ask at least simple questions so that that, and of course, if there's another external person that you can have look at your stuff to just confirm everything's being done properly, it's just another, like we said, another set of eyes so that we all are on the same page and that what you've got is accurate.
One last thing I want to say as a consideration is there's nothing wrong with hiring a new accountant out of school who wants to work in a small business and then having them train with the bookkeeper. There are bookkeeping firms out there that will help you train in the interior design or in other areas so that you can have that internal person, especially if they're going to be providing the oversight. Many times they'll help train an internal person on how to do some things that will help you later. So it doesn't mean that you can only go after resources that have 20 years of experience in interior design. Honestly, it's a willingness to learn our industry and a willingness to say, I'm willing to be humble enough to let somebody show me how to do this and not, so cocky that they know it. At that point, you could hire somebody around you who's either right out of accounting school or who has a bookkeeping degree or who's QuickBooks certified and is willing to learn it. That's the difference. They got to be willing to dig in and learn it and not just kind of rush it through.
So I'll tell you, I've been doing this for 20 years and I was 9 years in before I finally went out to my first interior design studio for a client. And I was thinking, my boss was just like, well, they need help, whatever, you've got 10 years of experience, whatever. And I got there and I got on the computer and I was in a design software that wraps accounting in. And I thought to myself, what is going on? I was clueless. it was a humbling experience from someone who is like, this dork accountant that thinks I know everything. But I found it interesting, and it was something new to learn, and I kind of picked it up and that kind of stuff. But even, with that much experience, I had to learn and be willing to learn, but it didn't take long. Once I learned the nuances of everything as far as the industry was concerned, I kind of picked it up, but I wanted to. So
yeah, that willingness is huge.
Exactly. If they don't have a lot of experience, but they have a willingness, and you have someone, either it's yourself or someone else, who can kind of give them the detailed information they need and the willingness to train them properly. If it's an internal person, then it could be something that works out.
I want to throw out just one more situation that I've currently seen with a client, and that's one where the bookkeeper is not managing the recognition of revenue and let's just say the invoice cycle, the way that the accountant believes that it needs to be done to be able to be accounted for properly and taxed properly and managed properly, for the business owner. And so if you are bringing in a new bookkeeper or bringing one in, there's nothing wrong with having a conversation between the bookkeeper and the accountant, or you and the accountant, on what is the best practice that you have set up as a strategy for accounting for your firm that will make taxation easier, payments easier, the oversight, the pieces that Pete, you said the accountant does. Having the conversation with what does the accountant want to see in the best way, and then adapting your bookkeeping policies to match that. So bookkeeping doesn't need, in my opinion, bookkeeping doesn't need to drive accounting. The way you need to account for it needs to drive the way you keep the books.
Right. Even if you are like, hey, this is our process, whether it's money comes in and we invoice that day, or we don't invoice until we deliver the goods, if it's product related, that's our process. What do you think of that? And just to see what they say, and they might say, oh yeah, okay, all right, that's your process, that's how we're going to follow it. They could be like, oh, that's all wrong, and you have to do it like this. And then,
or in this state, I mean, let's be honest, in this state, this needs to be recognized this way. I mean, it can very well change from place to place. So having, let me add that in, and then we'll wrap this up. But having a bookkeeper and an accountant who understand the laws of the state that you are in is also very important, especially as we're going more and more virtual. They just need to be aware of what's happening in your state, and how things need to be done, because they're not all the same.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So Pete, I feel like we just beat up on the fact that we need more really great bookkeepers. So if any bookkeepers out there are listening and you want to really have a killer business right now, if you learn interior design, and what we do and how we do it, and I would say start in QuickBooks. If you start there, I think you could just about make a business with that.
I know you can. I know.
If you're good and you can do bookkeeping,
I can refer you a ton.
Heck, I think Pete and I could keep you employed.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. We'd love to meet you.
Well, exactly. Who are you? I'm waiting. Call me. Thank you for having the conversation. I know it's not always an easy one, but we also want to let people know we recognize that's difficult. We recognize the difficulty. It's not in my wheelhouse to solve personally, and it's not in yours. Neither is it in our business plans. But we are trying our best to work with clients around it and to give you resources and ways to think about it, and when to recognize in your own business that it's time to pivot and either bring somebody else in, ask for more resources. What might that look like? What can I expect? So we can't personally solve it, but we can certainly put a shout out for all the design bookkeepers.
Yeah. And we also know that, when everyone is doing that and working, and that's all happening, we all are giving the client the maximum value. So that's why having the perfect team, when it makes our lives easier, because our whole point of going to work every day is to bring value to the client. So
exactly. Well, thanks for coming in and having this conversation. I appreciate it. And
this is fun.
If I find like all the best bookkeepers in all the world, then I'm going to call you. I'll share them with you.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks, Pete.
All right. See you soon.
Thanks so much, Peter, for joining us today. I really had a great conversation. It is hard when we look into our business and see a hole, or when we look in the industry and see a hole. But what it also allows us to do is be creative and find a way to solve that problem. So I hope that this has inspired you to at least think about that in your own firm, what can be done and what is the best practices and ways to accomplish that. I also want to ask that if you are interested in learning more about understanding your financials, that you take a look over on my website at scarletthreadconsulting.com. Look under the resources tab and you will see the 3 financial courses that will absolutely help you move your business forward in financial fluency and understanding. Remember, we have to choose to be profitable because profit doesn't happen by accident. Profit is a Choice is proud to be part of the designnetwork.org, where you can discover more design media reaching creative listeners. Thanks for listening, and stay creative and business minded.